If you want to run lighter on your feet, hit a PR this year, or even run and feel stronger when you're running, you have to implement certain things in your strength routine. If you don't, you're going to be a strong person, but not necessarily a strong runner. So the first thing we have to implement is a rotational force. We often think about when we're running as it just being a straight linear movement forward, but there's actually a lot of rotations happening in our joints. For example, our hip is rotating in an internal external rotation. We have rotations happening at our mid back as we're swinging our arms. So it's important that we start to address this rotational force. The second thing is that we must implement a horizontal force in order to keep our momentum moving forward, have that power to keep our momentum moving forward, and therefore run faster. The third one is a vertical force. Now this is still important, even though when we're running, we're not just going up and down, but there is some movement up and down. So we have to be able to control that movement, and we have to be able to generate power up and forward in order to run faster. Number 4 is single leg power. Now this is important because when we're pushing off the ground when we're running, it's off one leg. We're not pushing off both legs. So if we don't have that single leg power, we're not going to be able to run as fast as we want. And it's just going to allow us to be able to push ourselves during a harder workout, which is why it's so important that we address the calf and the soleus with single leg power. The fifth one, and maybe even the most important, is unilateral strength or single leg strength. Now, when we're running, we have one leg on the ground and we're swinging the other leg through, so we have to be able to control that leg in single leg in order for it to be an efficient stride. Now, today I'm going to show you one exercise for each of these elements so you can start to implement them in your strength routine and therefore hit your goals this year. Now, there might be some crossover that's happening, and that just means we're getting more bang for our buck with each exercise. So the first one I'm going to show you is a single leg exercise, but yes, it also does work on vertical force. But this exercise specifically works on single leg stability, being able to control that leg in single leg. So this is called a cone tap. I have a foam roller as my cone, and all I'm going to do is place it a couple feet away from my lead leg. So I'm going to stand on one leg, and all I'm going to do is squat down, tap the cone or the foam roller or the water bottle in front of you, and come up. So the further away this cone is, the harder it is going to be to drop down, stabilize in single leg, and come up. Now, the closer it is, the easier. Make sure as you're coming down, a couple things to note because this one can be a little wonky and we can start to compensate easily. So it's really important that you do focus on form with this one. So as you come down, you want to make sure your kneecap is facing forward. You're not kicking your hip out to the side. You want to make sure that your knee is going over your second or third toe, so making sure it's facing straight ahead, dropping straight down. We also want to make sure we're not reaching, like if this is too far away from us, we want to make sure we're not reaching and bending with our spine. We want to be able to drop down and just tap the cone or the object in front of you. So a lot of it is coming from the depth of the squat versus this. Okay, drop down. You can tap your back leg if you need to and come on up. Now the next exercise is focusing on vertical force. Now you can think of this as a back squat or a front squat, holding the weight or the barbell in front, but I'm going to give you an exercise that I love for running, and that is a split squat. Now a split squat is great because it works on stabilizing that gluteus medius a lot more than those traditional glute med exercises like clamshells or side steps, and it also focuses on that vertical force. So all you're going to do is put one leg in front, one leg behind, have two weights near your lead leg, and you're going to drop down and come on up. Try to bring that back leg down as far as you can. You can even tap it on the ground and up. And you will start to feel this in your quads and in your glutes. And it's a great exercise. As you can see, I'm coming up and down, which means I'm working on that vertical force. Now the third one is horizontal force. And like I said, this is great to keep the momentum going forward, which means we're really working on loading our posterior chain. So you can think glutes and hamstrings, stabilizing in our low back, which is exactly what we're doing when we're running, which is why this is so important. So a good example of this is a traditional deadlift. And you might think that it's It's a little bit of a vertical force, yes, but it's mostly that horizontal force because the first movement is your hips going back in order to load the posterior chain. With like a split squat or a squat, the first movement is dropping straight down. But with this one, the first movement with like a deadlift or a single leg deadlift, we are working on bringing our hips back in order to load that posterior chain. So a deadlift is a great exercise for this, but I'm gonna make it a little bit more specific to running and do a single leg deadlift. Now I'm gonna modify it with a kickstand single leg deadlift, which really means all my weight is on that front leg, but I have the back foot down just as a kickstand for balance. So I'm gonna bring my hips back, drop down, loading my glutes and hamstrings, and come on up. Bring those hips back, and come on up. Notice that my trunk isn't tipping over. My first movement is back, 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 back with my hips. Like I'm pushing a wall away from me with my glutes. And come on up. So make sure a lot of the weight as you come down is not in your toes. You don't want to be tipping forward like this, leading with your spine and putting the weight through your toes and the ball of your foot. Most of the weight should be in your heel and then in your posterior chain as well. These last two could be arguably the most important because they are most forgotten about. So number 4 is rotational power. I'm gonna go into a chop. So any sort of chopping motion like this is gonna be a rotational movement or rotational force. Even like a Russian twist where you're sitting on your butt rotating. You can also add in rotations to your normal squat or deadlift. I like to add in, we just did a single leg deadlift with a kickstand. You can add in a rotation there just to start to combine a couple of these because they're all just so important with running. So let's go into a half kneeling chop. So I'm gonna grab one, or this is more of a half kneeling chop with a weight. You can also use it with a band, but I'm gonna basically come from my back hip and back. So from the front view, I'm rotating my trunk and my shoulders. So make sure your shoulders rotate all the way over, facing away from your pant pocket that you're starting from, and then rotate all the way to the other side in order to get that rotational power. If you're really trying to PR your race this year, you have to incorporate single leg power exercises because basically the more power you can generate, the faster you're gonna run. I love single leg power exercises because I also think they're able to show if you have weakness on one side and then you know you need to strengthen that one side because let's face it, if you're doing a single leg power exercise and the right side feels a lot weaker than the left, you're only gonna be as strong as your weakest link when you're running, and that might be holding you back from actually being able to build speed. So one of my favorite exercises for this, I'm gonna have a wall nearby, but it's basically a skater squat jump. So I'm gonna stand on my right leg, walls on my left side. I'm gonna come down into a skater squat. So ideally my arms would be out here, but I have the wall nearby, and I'm gonna jump up and go back into a skater squat. And as I progress, I won't have to hold on to the wall. But if you need to, maybe it's balance reasons, you can have that wall nearby. You're really dropping down, loading your glute and your quad, and jumping up. And you can do that on both sides. Start to compare, hey, does one side feel weaker than the other? Maybe it's the side that you've had injuries on, but that might be holding you back from actually being able to build speed. These exercises are great if you want to build speed, you want to build more power, you want to build more strength, but we really only did one exercise for stability, and that is needed for running. We have to be able to stabilize and control the joint